You know that ultimate 3 a.m. kind of question, the one that just keeps you staring up at the ceiling? Well, here's one for you. What is the deal with certain cultures eating dogs? Seriously, is it a thing of the past? Is it just some desperation move for protein? Or is it largely a stereotype that we've all just kind of blindly accepted? And honestly, perhaps the much more mind-bending question is this: why don't we eat them? Look, I know. To most Westerners, the very idea of eating dogs is highly squeamish. It's a deeply uncomfortable thing to even think about, but we're going to push past that discomfort today. We absolutely aren't here to mock anyone, and we definitely aren't here to feel culturally superior. We're going to dig right into the truth, hold up the cultural mirror, and figure out how our world actually works. Welcome to The Explainer. I'm your host, Legend. Today, we're taking a deeply fascinating, completely non-judgmental dive into a topic that makes a whole lot of people squirm. But man, it teaches us so much about who we actually are. Before we get started on this mind-bending journey, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button and subscribe for more content just like this. We explored the truly fascinating edges of human culture here, and you definitely won't want to miss what we've got coming next. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the dog meat reality, move beyond the Asian stereotype, see exactly how that stereotype formed, explore the pet versus protein divide, and finally wrap it up with how food ties into our culture and identity. Let's jump into our first topic, the dog meat reality, looking specifically at the hard data. So, the big question, does this actually happen as much as people think? Well, yes, dog and cat meat is eaten in parts of Asia, but it is not nearly as common as the stereotype suggests. Take South Korea, for example, a country that's been long associated with dog meat stew. If we look back to 2015, about 27% of people polled said they had eaten dog in the past year, but in a recent poll, that number absolutely plummeted to just 8%. What we're seeing here is a massive, and I mean massive, generational divide. Younger generations just do not eat dog meat nearly as often, and they view the entire practice much, much less favorably than older generations do. In fact, this shift isn't just a cultural feeling anymore, it's legal. In 2024, South Korea passed a law banning dog meat entirely, complete with a 3-year grace period to just completely phase out the industry. And, the trend is incredibly similar across other nations that are often tied to the stereotype. Take Vietnam. It's thought to have the world's second highest consumption, eating about 5 million dogs a year. But public opinion is rapidly moving away from it. Right now, most Vietnamese citizens are actively supporting a ban on the trade. Then we have China, which is the world's largest consumer, though it's mainly concentrated in rural areas. Now, you might have heard of the Yulin Dog Meat Festival. Well, it's actually not some ancient tradition passed down through the centuries. It was started in 2009 by traders specifically to boost sales. But recently, attendance and sales there are totally declining. And that decline is heavily driven by younger Chinese activists who overwhelmingly oppose eating dogs. Actually, in 2020, Shenzhen became the very first city in mainland China to completely ban the sale and consumption of dog and cat meat, with other cities already following suit. Now, what's really interesting about this next point is that it dismantles a massive misconception we've all been fed recently. Think back to the early days of the pandemic. The internet was just flooded with this horror show imagery of Asian wet markets. We saw pictures of wire cages, exotic animals, and we all basically assumed the worst. But the term wet market doesn't mean some exotic animal death pit. It literally just refers to markets selling fresh produce, meat, and fish. We're talking everyday things like bok choy and chicken feed. While a tiny, tiny handful might traffic in wildlife or dogs and cats, the vast majority are literally just standard, everyday farmers markets. That highly sensationalized pandemic imagery massively and unfairly reinforced pre-existing stereotypes. Moving on to our next section, let's step beyond the Asian stereotype and look at this as a global practice. If we zoom out for a second, we find something that might genuinely shock a lot of Western viewers. Eating dogs and cats is not, and literally has never been, an exclusively Asian practice. Take Switzerland, for example. It is actually legal to eat dogs there. In 2014, activists pointed out that roughly 3% of Swiss people had eaten dog or cat meat. In fact, in some small, rural Swiss areas, a Christmas cat stew is still part of their traditional holiday menus. Crazy, right? Moving over to Africa, in parts of Nigeria, Cameroon, and Ghana, dog meat is sold openly in markets and is often considered a medicinal food or even an aphrodisiac. And if we look back through history, it's everywhere. The Aztecs famously bred the Mexican hairless dogs specifically for food. The Romans did it. The Polynesians did it. So the reality is, this isn't just an Asian phenomenon. It's a deeply historical human one. So that brings us to section 3,
How exactly did the stereotype form? We have to ask the why Asia question. If cultures from Switzerland all the way to Mexico have these histories of eating dog, why did this stereotype stick so intensely to Asia?
Well, while there is ancient history there, like in ancient China where dogs were raised as livestock, or Korea where dog meat soup was historically believed to boost stamina, the stereotype in the West really solidified due to timing, specifically the timing of war. American exposure to Asian culture and food largely came through World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. I mean, think about it. This is not exactly a time for deep cultural nuance. You have these young, incredibly culture-shocked soldiers stationed overseas, and they are encountering wildly unfamiliar foods. They go home and bring back stories. Some of them are real, some are wildly exaggerated. And during a brutal war, when you're actively trying to dehumanize an enemy, mocking what they eat is literally one of the easiest ways to draw a hard, solid line between us and them.
And this brilliantly illustrates the second reason the stereotype stuck so hard: visibility. There is this stark, totally obvious contrast between Western supermarkets and traditional Asian markets. In the West, meat is completely sanitized. It's wrapped in styrofoam and clear plastic, so it doesn't even look like an animal anymore. But traditional Asian markets displayed live animals for sale: dogs in cages, cats in baskets, frogs in tanks. To outside eyes that were entirely raised on sanitized wrapped beef, that visibility is incredibly jarring. It's a huge shock to the system. And once that image hits the culture, it just becomes a shorthand for weird or uncivilized, making it super easy for people to look down on those who do things differently. Now let's get into section 4. It's time to examine the pet versus protein divide.
It is time to turn the critical lens inward for a minute and look at our own Western eating habits. Why do we eat what we eat, and why don't we eat dogs? We often say it's because dogs are smart, or because they're family. But is that logically consistent? Consider this number: 75 million. That is the number of pigs Americans eat every single year. Honestly, the only food more American than a hamburger is bacon. But here is the catch. Pigs are incredibly smart. Many researchers argue they are actually smarter than dogs. Pigs can play video games, they recognize their own names, they form deep, lasting emotional bonds. Yet we don't blink twice at eating 75 million of them. We don't avoid eating dogs because it's objectively wrong in some universal cosmic sense. We do it because somewhere along the way, our culture drew a big, bright moral line. And other cultures, well, they just drew that line somewhere else.
Let's move to this breakdown and see how this builds a really fascinating picture. When you map out cultural food norms, the inconsistencies become incredibly clear. Take the bunny. It's the universal mascot for cuteness, right? But it's popping up more on menus in the US, and it's incredibly popular in France and Italy. Horses are definitely a no-go in the US, but in France, Belgium, and Japan, you can get horse meat raw, seared, or stuffed into sausages. Meanwhile, an American might be totally bothered by the idea of eating a horse, but they'll gladly grab a beef burger while sitting on a leather sofa. But try taking that burger to India. Cows are holy there. Harming one isn't just offensive, it is literally criminal in many states, and 40% of the entire country is strictly vegetarian. And across the Middle East, in Islamic and Jewish communities, pork, America's absolute favorite, is strictly forbidden and considered unclean. The takeaway here? One culture's sacred animal, or best friend, is absolutely another culture's dinner.
Bringing us to our final section, let's explore the deep connections between food, culture, and identity, and the psychology behind it all. So why do we react so intensely to the food choices of others? It's not just about logic. Think about it. If it were about logic, Americans wouldn't eat highly intelligent pigs. So the crucial point is summarized perfectly by this quote from psychologist Paul Rosen. He spent decades studying this exact topic, and he says, "Disgust protects the soul, not the body." When you cringe at the thought of eating a dog, or someone from the Middle East cringes at you eating a pig, that disgust isn't a fact, it's a feeling. And like most feelings, it is a product of exactly who raised you and what your specific culture accepts as normal. Disgust isn't about staying physically healthy from bad food. It is about staying morally and sometimes spiritually pure. You see, food is one of the absolute oldest tribal markers human beings have. What we choose to eat, and equally what we refuse to eat, broadcasts our loyalty. It broadcasts our belonging and our righteousness. When somebody eats something entirely outside of our food code, especially an animal that we personally see as cuddly or sacred or symbolic of the home, it doesn't just gross us out on a physical level, it deeply challenges our identity. It makes that other person feel entirely foreign to us. Our food preferences are not just about sustenance or getting protein. They are a mirror reflecting exactly how we see ourselves, how we view others, and how we have historically defined us versus them.
Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative thought. If our profound sense of disgust is really just a feeling based on where we happen to be raised, where do you draw your moral line? And more importantly, why do you draw it right there? It's definitely something to chew on the next time you look down at your dinner plate. Well, that is all for this explainer. I really hope this deep dive challenged your perspective and was worth your time today. I'm Legend. Please don't forget to like this explainer and subscribe to the channel for more incredible content where we question the world around us. See you next time.